The deputy defense minister said that Ukrainian forces advanced 2 kilometers in Bakhmut, completely liberated the T-0504 highway, surrounded the Wagner army trapped in the city. During a press conference at the Kyiv Press Center on Saturday morning, May 13, Ukraine's deputy defense minister Hanna Maliar said Ukrainian forces were able to repel Russian troops 2 kilometers around the city of Bakhmut in the past week. The opponent failed to carry out his plan, and suffered heavy loss of manpower. "We haven't lost a single spot in Bakhmut this week." Bakhmut was the site of a months-long assault by Russian forces, including Wagner mercenaries, which displaced thousands of people and left the area devastated. But despite the huge amount of manpower that Russia has poured in to capture the city, they have not been able to take full control and this week have suffered heavy losses in the area. The entire 17.2 kilometers section of the T-0504 highway from Chasiv Yar to Bakhmut has been cleared, and is completely under our fire control, she added. Russian troops are reported to have fled from the T-0506 highway, but the highway is littered with the remains of Russian tanks and armored vehicles as well as other vehicles. As of Saturday morning, the Russians were still able to control the highway with fire from a distance. The Ukrainian infantry needed to push back the Russians from Kromov before the engineers could clear it up. CNN previously reported on Ukraine's counterattacks and attacks on either side of Bakhmut as the country tries to defend the fiercely contested front. On Thursday night, the Russian Defense Ministry denied reports by Russian military bloggers that Ukraine had breached their defenses in the region. However, by noon on Friday Moscow time, Russian Defense Ministry spokesman Lieutenant General Igor Konashenkov acknowledged that the Russian troops had lost the northern part, but explained that it was a decision to evacuate tactically back home. More favorable locations. 2. Boss Wagner claimed Russia lost 5 square kilometers in Bakhmut on Friday. The head of the private military group Wagner has harshly criticized the Russian Defense Ministry for what he describes as the worsening situation of Russian forces in Bakhmut. This came after the ministry admitted its forces had retreated from areas north of the besieged city of Bakhmut, claiming that they had moved to more favorable defensive positions. Wagner's head, Yevgeny Prigozhin, said the statement was insidious to put it mildly, adding that the ministry needed to stop lying immediately. Prigozhin described the regrouping as a non-tactical flight and stated, "There was simply a flight of units of the Ministry of Defense from the flanks following an exit to the Berkivka Reservoir, located just northwest of Bakhmut." In total, this retreat allowed the Ukrainians to recapture an area of 5 square kilometers, today alone, he claimed. Prigozhin stated that Ukraine would take all tactical heights. He also noted that Ukrainian forces had completely liberated the heavily contested road from Chasiv Yar to Bakhmut, which was the key T-0504 route for Kyiv's efforts to resupply their forces in Syria. Bakhmut. Boss Wagner also reiterated his previous complaints about the lack of support from the Department of Defense as their flanks collapsed, and questioned whether the group and its fighters were accused of treason. Country if they leave Bakhmut without the permission of the Chief of Staff. 3. Russian Defense Ministry admits losses north of Bakhmut. On Thursday night, the Russian Defense Ministry still vehemently denied reports by Russian military bloggers that Ukraine had breached its defenses in the region. However, Friday afternoon Moscow local time, the Russian Defense Ministry had to admit its forces had withdrawn from the areas north of the besieged eastern city of Bakhmut, and announced they have moved to more favorable defensive positions. In order to strengthen the stability of the defense, units of the Russian Southern Army occupied the line in the direction of Maloy-Leonovka, said Russian Defense Ministry spokesman Lieutenant General Igor Konashenkov. He said the move would allow the Russian military to take advantage of the favorable conditions of the Berkivka Reservoir. According to CNN, Konashenkov's statement effectively confirms that Russian forces have lost several kilometers of territory. It is noted that Konashenkov's way of speaking has many flaws. When it says that, in order to strengthen the stability of the defense, units of the Russian Southern Army occupied the line in the direction of Maloy-Leonovka, it shows that the Russians were proactive in this action and Maloy-Leonovka appeared to be a new Russian site captured on Friday. Actually, it's not like that. Konashenkov himself said on March 15 that the Russians had captured Maloy-Leonovka. In a word, the Russians fled to a position they had taken 2 months ago. Mercenary group founder Wagner and financier Yevgeny Prigozhin told the Russian Defense Ministry that this is called fleeing, not regrouping, and promised to provide more details at later stage. The Russian Defense Ministry's announcement comes after an unusual late Thursday through Friday denial by the Russian Defense Ministry that denied reports that Ukrainian forces had made breakthroughs along the front line around Bakhmut, namely in the direction of the village of Maloy-Lyanovka. The claims spread by individual Telegram channels about defensive breakthroughs in different parts of the communication line are not true, the Russian Defense Ministry said on Thursday. A battle is currently underway to repel the attack of Ukrainian units in the direction of Maloy-Lyanovka. 4. Russian troops retreat to defensive positions in Bakhmut area. The Russian Defense Ministry said its troops had retreated to more favorable defensive positions near a water reservoir northwest of the eastern Ukrainian city of Bakhmut. Friday's announcement was Moscow's first admission that Ukraine had successfully recaptured the land around Bakhmut, a heavily devastated city with a population of about 70,000 before the war that Russia had attempted. Conquered for more than 10 months. Russia's defense statement came hours after Kyiv said its forces had advanced about 2 kilometers around Bakhmut this week. Hanna Maliar, Ukraine's deputy defense minister, said on Friday, "The enemy has suffered a great loss of manpower. Our defenders have advanced 2 kilometers in the Bakhmut area. We haven't lost a spot in Bakhmut this week." Colonel Serhiy Cherevatiy, a spokesman for the Eastern Ukraine Military Command, said brief fighting broke out in the village of Maloy-Lyanovka, before the Russians fled the village to the Berkivka Reservoir. These developments come as the Russian Foreign Ministry condemns the UK for supplying Ukraine with long-range Storm Shadow cruise missiles in order to increase Kyiv's chances of success in a counterattack. The United Kingdom was the first Western country to provide a long-range missile with a range of up to 250 kilometers. 5. The Wagner boss, Yevgeny Prigozhin, worries that the Ukrainian army will eventually surround his group trapped in the city of Bakhmut. Yevgeny Prigozhin, whose army has carried out the majority of the fighting in and around Bakhmut, said through his press service that what the Russian Defense Ministry has described is in fact a disengagement flee, leaving his army in peril. After saying Ukraine had been able to regain full control of a key supply road linking Bakhmut with the town of Chasiv Yar and had captured high ground with a tactical advantage, he said on Saturday that the risk is that if more ground is lost, Ukrainian forces may gradually encircle Bakhmut. Prigozhin, who has been openly hostile to the Russian Defense Ministry for months, has repeatedly accused senior leadership of sabotaging Wagner's efforts on Bakhmut and this week accused it of doing too little to protect the two countries. Bakhmut's side. The Russian Defense Ministry appeared to have denied that assertion on Friday, saying that Ukraine's attempts to counterattack Bakhmut's flank had been repulsed. Prigozhin continued to complain that his men had not yet received enough ammunition and equipment. He said that the plan to capture Bakhmut city came to a standstill when the Russian regulars fled at a time when Wagner troops had captured 95% of Bakhmut city, and only needed to capture about 20 more buildings to control. Completely city. Bakhmut, much of which is now in ruins, has been at the center of fierce fighting for more than 9 months. 6. Russia will put ICC judges on the wanted list for daring to issue arrest warrants for Putin. Investigative Committee Chairman Alexander Bastrykhin said that the Russian Investigative Committee will soon add to the country's most wanted list the judges of the International Criminal Court, or ICC, who have issued arrest warrants holding Russian President Vladimir Putin and another official. The investigative committee then promptly opened a criminal case against the chairman and 3 judges, who actively influenced the adoption of this decision. They will soon be on the wanted list, Bastrykhin said at the St. Petersburg. The International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Russian President Vladimir Putin and Russia's Child Rights Commissioner Maria Lvova-Belova on March 17 for plotting to kidnap Ukrainian children to Russia. The court said there was reasonable grounds to believe that Mr. Putin is personally criminally responsible for the alleged crimes, because he directly committed them with others and because he failed to exercise proper control over civilian and military subordinates who committed such acts. The ICC charges are the first formal charges brought against officials in Moscow since the country began its unprovoked attack on Ukraine last year. Russia is not a member of the ICC. Since the court does not conduct trials in absentia, any Russian officials charged with charges will have to be turned over by Moscow or arrested outside of Russia. The Kremlin called the ICC's actions outrageous and unacceptable. 7. Moscow warns of comparable response to Britain's supply of long-range missiles to Kyiv. The Kremlin has warned its armed forces will give an appropriate response to the UK's decision to supply Kyiv with long-range missiles. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov condemned the move during a press conference on Thursday, promising a Russian response. "This will require an appropriate response from our military, who will naturally make decisions regarding this view, added Peskov. Earlier on Thursday, CNN reported that the UK had supplied Ukraine with several Storm Shadow cruise missiles, citing many senior Western officials. The missiles have a maximum range of 250 kilometers and provide Ukrainian forces with a new long-range strike capability against a much-anticipated counterattack. UK Defence Secretary Ben Wallace has informed the House of Commons that the UK is sending Storm Shadow missiles to Ukraine. A senior US military official told CNN the missile is a real game-changer from a range perspective and gives Kyiv the capability the country has demanded since its inception. The beginning of the war. 8. A 60-year-old Russian woman was sentenced to 2 years of probation for insulting Putin's parents. On Thursday, a court handed down a 2-year suspended prison sentence to a 60-year-old Russian woman for leaving a piece of paper with offensive inscriptions on the grave of President Vladimir Putin's parents. Prosecutors have asked for a suspended 3-year prison sentence for Irina Tsaibaneva, who was accused in October of desecrating a grave in St. Petersburg with a note calling Putin's parents of a madman. Putin is going to die. You were born and raised an eccentric and a murderer, the letter read, urging the deceased's parents to take him with you. According to the Sota news site, Tsaibaneva has no plans to appeal the verdict. She said she wrote the letter after seeing the news about the war in Ukraine and understood that everything is very scary, everything is very sad, and there are a lot of deaths, according to the Mediazona news agency. 9. Polish minister says army did not inform government about missile. Poland's defense minister, Mariusz Błaszczak, confirmed that the military was aware of a missile that could have reached the country in December but did not notify the government. Poland has been wary of the possibility of an arms spill from the war in neighboring Ukraine, especially since 2 people were killed near the border last November in an accident that Warsaw concluded was an anti-aircraft missile. No, Ukraine shot by mistake. Polish media reported in recent days that a military object found in a forest in northern Poland in April was a Russian Kh-55 missile and that Polish military authorities had saw an object fly into the country's airspace in December but then lost track of it. Błaszczak said an examination he requested showed that the Armed Forces Operations Command received information from Ukraine about the object, but did not take appropriate action. Błaszczak said, on December 16, the affiliated Air Command Center received information from the Ukrainian side about a Polish approach to space, possibly a missile. According to the results of the test, the operational commander did not perform his duty to notify me and other agencies involved in the processes of objects appearing in Polish airspace. Poland's Prime Minister, Mateusz Morawiecki, reiterated earlier on Thursday that he had heard about the existence of a military object found in a Polish forest for the first time in April. 10. Military officer warns that Ukraine will launch major offensive deep into Russia. Newsweek had an article titled Ukraine to launch massive strike deep in Russia, military officer warns, which means military officer warns that Ukraine will launch massive strike deep into Russia. Mikhail Kodaryanok, a former commander of the Russian Air Defense Forces and a commentator on Russian state television, predicted that Ukraine would use high-precision weapons to carry out an expected counterattack by first of all launched a major attack on Russian territory. He made his prediction while assessing the heavy weapons Ukraine possesses in a Russian state TV segment posted on Thursday with English subtitles by BBC monitoring correspondent Francis Scar. Ukraine is said to be preparing for a spring counteroffensive to take back territories invaded by Russia since the war began with the invasion in February 2022. The country's military capabilities have been improved, bolstered by Western aid in recent months, including advanced military equipment, tanks, and artillery. However, on Thursday, President Volodymyr Zelensky said Kyiv was delaying the counterattack because Ukraine lacked enough Western weapons to succeed without causing excessive casualties, the AP news agency reported. In his remarks, which were made earlier, Kodaryanok said the delay in launching the counterattack was because Ukraine was waiting for the arrival of additional high-precision weapons. We have seen isolated cases of using high-precision ammunition, but they are yet to be used on a large scale. HIMARS ammunition, we don't know how much or what range they provided. So in my view, Ukraine's counteroffensive operation will begin with a large-scale attack using that high-precision weaponry as deep as possible into all possible locations. Possible in Russia. Mainly the infrastructure, of course, Kodaryanok said. Newsweek reached out for comment via email to the Russian Defense Ministry. Ukraine's Defense Minister Alexei Reznikov said late last month that preparations for the counteroffensive were in the final stages and that the Ukrainian army was being trained to use Western-supplied weapons and military equipment. The preparations are coming to an end, because in addition to weapons and military equipment, our servicemen must also be trained in how to use them. We have received state-of-the-art systems, Reznikov told reporters at the time. Nearly 2 months after Russia invaded Ukraine last year, Koderianok has strongly criticized Russian President Vladimir Putin's war effort in the Eastern European country. He warned at the time that the situation for the Russian military is actually going to get worse. But soon after, he issued a contradictory statement, praising Russia's military capabilities. In Thursday's segment posted by Skar, Koderianok said the Ukrainians would not announce the start of a counterattack until they had first results of operational significance, such as success in retrieving one of their temporarily occupied territories. But it is precisely at that time, when they carry out a large-scale attack and an electronic attack, the offensive operation of the Ukrainian armed forces will begin, he said. They're missing something, and it looks like they're waiting for another batch to arrive. In this respect, we better prepare for the worst, he continued. Last month, Koderianok warned that Ukraine could attack Crimea, which Russia illegally annexed in 2014, by using missiles to attack Russian ships and facilities. Obviously they will be among the priorities, Koderianok said at the time. There is the Crimean Bridge, including all other means of communication used to transport material, the airport network, the checkpoints, the ships of the Black Sea Fleet on the way and in the areas. Mooring. All forces and means of the Ukrainian side will be used to attack these sensitive facilities, he continued. Koderianok also said that Ukrainian missile systems and other means with a range to these targets will certainly be used. Koderianok added, so in this regard, we have to be very well prepared to repel possible enemy attacks. Because, after all, the Crimean Peninsula is a priority for us. 11. NATO pivots to Asia as China's threat grows. Newsweek ran a report titled NATO pivots to Asia as China threat grows, meaning NATO pivots to Asia as the threat from China grows. Negotiations are underway for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, to open a liaison office in Japan, the first military alliance office in Asia. Japanese Foreign Minister Yoshimasa Hayashi told CNN in an interview on Wednesday, "We are in discussions, but no details have been finalized yet," adding that the country has no choice. Any other way than to rethink its security after Russia's invasion of Ukraine is making the world more destabilizing. News of the discussions is in line with NATO's plan to strengthen cooperation with Asia-Pacific countries. The military alliance said in a February statement that strengthening ties with Asia-Pacific partners is an important aspect of NATO's 2030 agenda. In June 2022, NATO published its Strategic Concepts document, listing China for the first time as one of its strategic priorities. The stated ambitions and coercive policies of the People's Republic of China challenge our interests, security and values, the document reads. NATO argues that Beijing poses systemic challenges to Euro-Atlantic security, but that Russia remains the most immediate and significant threat to the security of our allies. During the war in Ukraine, China criticized the US and NATO. Ukraine's Western allies, including the United States and other NATO members, have provided the war-torn country with financial support and military equipment to support its war against Russia. Nikkei Asia reported on May 3, citing unnamed Japanese and NATO officials, that the liaison office would allow the military alliance to work with Japan and other partners in the region, including New Zealand, Australia, and South Korea, as China emerges as a new challenger. This office will be the first of its kind in Asia. NATO has liaison offices at the United Nations in New York, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe in Vienna, and in Georgia, Ukraine, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Moldova and Kuwait. Newsweek has reached out to NATO via email for comment. According to Bill Hayton, a fellow with the Asia-Pacific program at Chatham House, the direct mention of China shows NATO members are concerned about security threats from Asia spreading to Europe and North America. The main point to remember here is that the NATO Charter limits the organization to operating in the North Atlantic region. It's not a global actor, Hayton told Newsweek. NATO establishes relations with Japan and South Korea for the first time in the context of North Korea's development of missiles and nuclear weapons capable of posing a threat to even NATO nations. Those relationships developed during NATO's intervention to support the government of Afghanistan, under the mandate of the United Nations, he said. Hayton explained that NATO's focus right now is on potential threats from China that could affect supply chains and communications within NATO countries. To that end, the alliance wants to work with Japan, South Korea, Australia and New Zealand, he said, referring to NATO's 2030 agenda. There will be a lot of exaggerated talk about NATO meddling in a scenario involving China. There is no possibility of that happening. NATO requires unanimity to operate, and there is no way all 31 members will agree to that anytime soon. Reacting to these developments, Mao Ning, a spokesman for China's foreign ministry, said on May 4 that Asia is a promising land for cooperation and development and should not become an arena. Political geography. NATO's continued eastward expansion in the Asia-Pacific, interference in regional affairs, attempts to undermine regional peace and stability, and promotion of confrontation within the bloc requires water in the area must be on high alert, she said. Kurt Volker, former U.S. ambassador to NATO and senior fellow at the Center for European Policy Analysis, or CEPA for short, said that the opening of a liaison office in Tokyo by the military alliance is a step forward, natural development in NATO's relationship with Japan, as well as other countries in Asia. For more than a decade, NATO has had partnerships with countries in Asia, including Japan, South Korea, Australia and New Zealand, Volker told Newsweek. Volker said NATO's most recent strategic concept highlights China as a challenge that NATO needs to increase its focus on. As the risks posed by China's military, economic and technological might increase, it is natural that NATO will take steps to be present and in dialogue more often with Japan, he added.